There's a ton of noise out there. So how do you get decision makers to pay attention to your brand? Start a podcast and invite your ideal clients to be guests on your show. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show.
Welcome back to B2B Growth. I am your host for today's episode, Nikki Ivy with Sweetfish Media. Listen, guys, I've got with me today Nimmy Reichenberg, who is Chief Marketing Officer at Siemplify. Nimmy, how you doing today?
I am great. Thank you so much for having me.
I mean, it's gonna be fun. I love the topic that we're going to be covering today, and I love the way that you sort of think about these things. Guys, we're going to be digging into how and why sales and marketing leaders can be BFFs, which is not often a way that we hear those two disciplines described, but it is something that we should be striving for. He's going to talk to us about why and how. But before we get into all of that, Nimmy, I would love it if you would just give us a little bit of background on yourself and what you and the folks at Siemplify have been up to these days.
Sure. So as you said, I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Siemplify. This is my fourth kind of CMO role. And Siemplify is in a cybersecurity company. We are in a space within cybersecurity that goes by SOAR, for Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response. And basically, we provide a platform that helps security professionals work more effectively, automate a lot of their tasks. For all us marketers out there, not unlike what a marketing automation platform is for marketing professionals, Siemplify aspires to be for security professionals. We're just over 100 employees, growing very, very fast, and having fun doing it.
Right. I'm glad you said that last part, because that absolutely matters. And one of the things that plays into how much fun we can have here in a B2B setting a lot of the time is to the extent to which not just the disciplines and departments of sales and marketing are aligned, but specifically how well those two leaders work together and collaborate together. So it's in everybody's best interest as much as possible for those two roles to be BFFs. And I want just to get us started, give us an overview of why you think that is, some experiences that you had maybe that sort of informed that opinion.
Sure. So, and I think we all read all the data about, the CMO turnover, and the tenure is getting shorter and shorter. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it used to be 24 months, and it dropped to 18. I've seen it as low as 12 months. Now, hopefully I still have a job by the time this podcast is over. But from my experience, one of the key factors to kind of CMO success and longevity is having a good relationship with your sales counterpart. And that's kind of why I picked this topic for all the CMOs out there, and maybe even more importantly for the aspiring CMOs out there, to, of course, understand that this is a cardinal importance, but then also share a little bit of how I believe I was successful for the most part in achieving this. And I think I've worked alongside a lot of sales leader, and the overwhelming majority of the times I've had a great working relationship with them. Still in touch with most of them to this day. And when I was interviewing for CMO roles, one of the common questions, and rightly so, was, well, how do you handle the tension between you and the head of sales? And my response was, well, in all honesty, I almost never experienced tension with my sales counterpart. Here's why. So that's why I kind of thought this was an important topic to discuss on this podcast.
For sure. And so Now you got to share it with us. Now that we know what, teach us your ways. So how did you avoid, because I think that's the first thing you talked about offline here about how adept you've been or had to be at diffusing some of that tension. Start with, though, some of the things you do going in, or some things folks can do going in to avoid that tension altogether if possible.
Sure. So to me, it all begins with shared goals and shared metrics, right? And I think everybody talks this talk and it's maybe common knowledge, but it's not always common practice, right? And I can't tell you how many times I've heard stories of meetings or board meetings where the CMO presented and said, all right, we've had a great quarter, right? We needed to generate 100 SQLs and we generated 200 SQLs, right? Great job marketing, we killed it. And after that, the head of sales went to present. And guess what, right? He said, oh, guys, we had a terrible quarter. We need to generate $10 million in revenue, and we only generated $6 million of revenue. And that is, that's an extreme case, but not that uncommon of clear misalignment between sales and marketing and how their goals are structured. So from a practical perspective, the number one goal that I always set for me and my team is closed revenue, right? And I get pushback on that a lot of times from marketers that maybe have worked at other companies. Says, what do you mean closed revenue? I mean, how can we influence closed revenue? We can generate leads, we can maybe generate pipeline, but ultimately, the salespeople are the ones that have to take these great leads that we generate, and they have full control over whether it turns into revenue. And my response to this objection is twofold. One is we want to have a successful relationship with sales. It's important for all of us. And this is the way to do it. And the second thing is I will say, hey, if you think the salespeople have full control over whether a deal closes or not, I've got some news to share with you, right? I mean, nobody has full control. There's so many factors that can go wrong, but being in that same boat with sales also means that we as marketing, even if I kind of break it down operationally, our job is to help sales at every stage of the deal, right? Our job is not done when we deliver a sales qualified lead to sales. There's many things that we can do throughout the sales cycle and after the sales cycle with customer advocacy, et cetera, to ultimately help sales close more revenue. So number one goal is always close revenue. Then you talk about like pipeline and SQLs, but typically the kind of hard revenue and or very closely tied to revenue goals are the lion's share of the goals that both me and my team are measured on. And the second thing that I kind of the flip side of that is what I never set as a goal that I share with sales or share with the board are marketing metrics that you can rig. So, I mean, there's a lot of talk about vanity metrics, and of course, web traffic is a vanity metric, but even goals like MQLs, ultimately, the way they work in most organizations, I can kind of set the threshold for what an MQL is. So if I want more MQLs, kind of tweak the definition a little bit or change the lead scoring model in my marketing automation system, and bam, here's more MQLs, right? So I can rig that to make myself look good. And of course, we measure MQLs and we measure web traffic and a whole bunch of other things. But again, when we talk about those shared goals, I avoid any metric that I can kind of artificially rig internal to the marketing department.
That makes sense. And I've seen that, I did a lot of my experience, as I like to say, in these startup streets out there in Austin as a salesperson. And I've seen what happens when those metrics that can be manipulated or, innocently misinterpreted, whatever it is, be the number one contributor to that misalignment. It's like the scenario you talked about in the very beginning where, you have these meetings and marketing is talking about how successful a quarter they've had. And there's a disconnect between that and what sales is experiencing. And I think that, like you said, it's, not understanding which of the shared metrics need to be focused on in order to achieve that common goal. But one of the ways, because you mentioned that, marketers would be like, hey, we're doing our job and sales is just, dropping the ball. And I don't know if the language is that strong. I've certainly heard it be that strong. But one of the ways to sort of, for your own good as a marketer, to test that out, as you mentioned offline, is to walk in their shoes And I've heard this. I've talked to other CMOs and marketing leaders who have had a similar idea, which is, make better use of call recording software and listen, or even do ride-alongs with sales folks and be on a live call with them. But you mentioned taking it a step further. You talked about actually prospecting. So if I'm a marketer and I have this idea, this slide deck, and I think this is the slide deck to end all slide decks, if only these salespeople could get it right, what better way to test that out for all of our good than for me to try and see what I can do with it? Talk to us about that for a little bit. This is interesting.
Sure. So I think the main point is, as you mentioned, and if you want to have a good relationship with sales, walk as many miles in their shoes, right? As makes sense. Because
Sure.
I think salespeople, and this is true at the leadership level, it's also true, further down the org chart, sales have respect for people who walk a day in their shoes, right? I mean, we actually here at Siemplify, we recently brought on a great new head of sales. And, one of the things he's already said multiple times, and I've heard it multiple times, and I agree that everybody thinks sales is easy until you actually have to do it, right? So sales is hard. And I think the only way you can appreciate how hard it is and what the challenges are is to walk a couple miles in their shoes. And that can mean a lot of things. I mean, as you said, it can mean things like going on sales calls, and whether they're virtual or actually physical, with sales, right? And one of the things that I try very hard with my sales counterpart is to get my team listening on customer calls. It's not always easy, and sometimes sales are protective of these things. But if you have a good relationship and you do it, obviously, in reason, I think it's very important to get your team members with sales in front of customers and prospective customers. I've gone as far as, yes, let's prospect. Let's take these, a bunch of these leads that come back from shows and actually, test our great scripts and our great messaging, right? And
Right.
and then we see firsthand if somebody says, hey, that's a pretty bad pitch, right? I mean, even presentations, right? Again, like I said, you build this great presentation. How about you present it on a customer call once, right? And see again if it's as great as you think it is, or if once it's in front of a real customer, maybe it's not as great as you think. So there's a lot of different things that marketing can do to walk some miles in sales' shoes and ultimately earn their respect. And one of the things that we talked about, and I gravitate towards, I don't know if I'm religious about it, but I gravitate towards is having the SDR or BDR or whatever you call it, but that team sit with marketing. And again, I've seen it succeed both under marketing and under sales. I've seen it not succeed both under marketing and under sales. But my case for putting it under marketing is twofold. One is exactly that alignment, right? You're much closer to walking a day in sales shoes when you own the SDR team, because now you're not just tossing business cards over the fence to sales. You actually have to reach out to them, see if those are good leads, actually get them interested, at least with that initial pitch, and do that initial qualification before you hand them over to sales, right? And then members who are members of the marketing team, which are the SDRs, then also can help the deal progress if needed as the deal moves and progresses towards a close. So I think owning the SDR function and having that currency with your head of sales be in sales qualified meetings and appointments and not in just raw leads really helps the goal of becoming the sales leaders BFFs. And you and I talked about this before the podcast. I think one of the things as a marketer, when you own the SDR team, you're going to you have to be prepared to promote some of them into sales roles, and then they leave the SDR team and become part of the sales team. But what you then have is you have these great ambassadors that used to be part of the marketing department now working in sales, and that helps bring those two teams closer together as well.
For sure, because they're ambassadors because they're believers, because they've been engaging with this marketing function for all this time. The best application that I've seen of what you just mentioned is a company I worked for. Back when I worked for them, they were a company called Kinzer out of Austin, Texas, sold electronic medical record software into the home health industry, and very successful. They're now huge. They're called WellSky. They're international. But at this time, we were called MDR, so market development reps. And we were paired 1-to-1 with account executives, but we for all intents and purposes, were part of this marketing team, to the extent that if the marketing team had put together a webinar that was for our, prospects and customers, the MDRs were required to sit in on those webinars, right? So we were engaging with the content that the marketing team was producing in a way that wasn't just, here is this deck, or here is this messaging. We were able to see the hows and whys in terms of the creation of that messaging. And yes, it absolutely stuck with us. And yes, it absolutely, we were having a much different conversation as, MDRs in that setup than most SDRs reporting to sales are having when they are engaging with a lead, right? Because let's say we hadn't sat in on those meetings and hadn't engaged with the content that marketing was putting out, but then we were responsible, because there was still an MQL system there, but then we were responsible for engaging with the leads that came from it, right? Some of the hand raisers from these webinars. Then we'd kind of be going into those conversations blind, as most salespeople do, right? And just kind of vaguely referencing, hey, I know that you sat in on this webinar of ours, blah, blah, blah. But having us have the responsibility of keeping ourselves informed on the content that marketing was creating, and then being really intentional about having a cohesive way that we were telling that story and continuing having a continuity of that message, even as we were reaching out to just hand raisers, made all the difference. Anybody out there, and I know I don't usually plug folks on this show, but if you're looking for an example of the things that we're talking about outside of Nimmy himself, that company, WellSky, really, really had it right when it comes to things like that. So just everything that you've been saying sort of reminded me of that use case for these things. So thank you so much for laying out for us the importance of sales leaders and marketing leaders becoming BFFs, and talking to us about really how to make that happen through shared metrics, through SDR teams that roll up into, or at least engage regularly with the marketing team, and through walking in each other's shoes. I think that's the way to go.
Yeah, and I have just one more point. This is maybe specific to CMO, something that I've always tried to do and also do here at Siemplify. Is, at Siemplify, we have the concept of executive sponsor. So when we work in a very big strategic deal, in addition to the regular team, right, sales and SCs that works the deal, there's also an executive sponsor. And that is somebody from management that kind of, has this oversight of the deal and can go to bat for that deal at the highest levels of the company. I always want to serve as an executive sponsor in a handful of deals and get this exposure into what is actually going on in the field. So that's a great kind of tactic for a CMO to get more involved in what happens.
I love that. I love that so much. So now, Nimmy, that I have successfully picked your brain and seen what I could get out of it, it's time for you to tell us what you are putting in it. So talk to us about a learning resource that you've been engaging with here recently, or one that you just kind of go back to from time to time, that is informing your approach. This just got you excited these days.
Sure. So first of all, I'll say the obvious. I think at this stage in my career, the number one resource that I actually go to is fellow CMOs and fellow marketing leaders, right? So I found that earlier in my career, I read and I followed more blogs more diligently. I followed more podcasts, which I still do, and this is one of them. So it was really great when you to actually have the opportunity to be on this podcast. But I think for me, at least over time, the number one resource is just talking to fellow CMOs, picking their brains, seeing what's out there. I do want to take you up on kind of a book that is off the beaten track. It's not one of the classic books that most people heard about, that I find myself referring to time and time again. I actually did that last week as well. It's a book called Killing Giants. I don't remember the author right now, but if you Google it, you'll find it. But it's called Killing Giants, and it's basically great strategies. Some of them I actually use to this day I think that the subheadline is, proven strategies to battle the Goliath in your industry, right? So, if you're a small company and you're going out up against big companies, which is often the case, I assume, for many of the listeners on this podcast, this book, and it's not new, maybe 10 years old or something, has some great strategies that I use to this very day as a relatively small company that sometimes have to compete with very big companies. So that's, I think, kind of an off the beaten track recommendation.
I love it. I'm all about giving the edge to the underdogs. Story of my life. So I'll have to check that one out. So Nimmy, I know that just like me, everybody listening has become a fast fan of yours, and they're going to want to know how to keep up with you. So let us know how folks can connect with you.
Sure. So very active on LinkedIn, N. Reichenberg. You can find it there. Less active on Twitter, but at N. Reichenberg is my handle on Twitter. And you can also email me at nreichenberg at Siemplify, which is spelled SIEMPLIFY.co.
Perfect. Thank you so much. There's a million other questions I'd like to ask you, just based on your experience as a 4-time CMO, as one of the aspirations I have actually as well. Well, I'd like to be at first a 1-time CMO, right? But it could fill another show. So we'll have to have you on again sometime here in the future. This has been great. I think you gave us a lot to chew on, to think about, and to apply, which is also my goal, always my goal for this show. Thank you so much for being on the show today, Nimmy.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big 3, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.